Introduction. I am delighted to be here with all of you today. I've been asked to include a disclosure slide. I have no commercial disclosures. I do have NIH funding for 4 grants that investigate the support of diverse, sorry, the pictures are over my words, diversity in the physician-scientist workforce. And then we have the Burroughs Wellcome Physician-Scientist Institutional Award at the University of Chicago, for which I serve as the program director. Oops, hang on. Now it's unhappy. There we go. All right, so by the end of the hour, I hope we will have had an opportunity to really discuss trends in medical student publication, talk about residency program director views related to student research and publication, and really consider the tension between student concern regarding competitiveness in the match and our goals as UME educators related to student research. By way of a little bit of background, which I know was just highlighted, I graduated from the University of Michigan with a biology degree where I did a little bit of basic science research on neuroblastoma, but published nothing except submitting my honors thesis. I then went to the University of Chicago for medical school where I did a little bit more basic science research, primarily on glutamine and heat shock proteins and sepsis. And I wanted to match in pediatrics. So people thought that my participation in research was like over the top, right? But they're already way back when in 1999, 2000, I had friends who wanted to be surgeons and they felt very strongly that they needed publications in order to match in their specialties of choice. I did continue on at the University of Chicago for my training, where I was fortunate enough to be funded on a T32 and then had an early faculty K08, again, looking at basic science related to ventilator-induced lung injury, and then made this 180-degree pivot over to medical education, where I was fortunate enough to participate across the research continuum at the University of Chicago and really join in a leadership role in our scholarship and discovery program, which is our scholarly concentration program. And did some early work that led to me being invited to lead the National Scholarly Concentrations Collaborative, which is really how I am joining you today. So the Scholarly Concentrations Collaborative is a group of educators who sit in my role across the country. In fact, Jenny Lynn from ICANN is part of our group. And we meet annually and have an active listserv to really talk about how we can support our students in their research, and how we can grow our programs. And, we have people who are, have very mature programs and folks whose institutions are just starting out. And so it's really a nice way to work together. My own scholarly interest is the impact of these programs on our students' career paths and on the physician-scientist workforce. So the Scholarly Concentrations Collaborative, which I've led for about 10 years now, and we met virtually during the pandemic, we have some hot topics that people always want to talk about. And some of these are program structure and evaluation, how we support these programs. We're very fortunate at the University of Chicago. I am the assistant dean. I have a co-director. We have 13 track leaders, and then we have a full-time staff manager who helps us with all of this. But they're people just trying to get these programs off the ground. And we really, offer suggestions and ideas for that. A hot topic over many years was how to find and train faculty mentors. Some people felt that there were just not insufficient mentors to support their students. What kind of training do we need to support folks to what kind of training do we need to support our faculty to mentor our students well? And over the past probably 6 or 7 years, student anxiety about publications has become a very hot topic, and then a hotter topic, and then a really hot topic, to the point that we as a group have had a lot of conversations about how this happened and what's actually real and how we might be able to quell this a little bit, because it has gone completely off the ranch. And it seems to be getting worse with this pass-fail USMLE Step 1. It seems that there are obviously fewer objective metrics in the application. Certainly, it seems that some highly competitive surgical subspecialties and derm, which we'll throw in there, seem to used to filter by the Step 1 score, and now they don't have that anymore. There's a lot of angst about programs just using a cut in the ARIS application, looking at numbers of publications and abstracts. And some schools are going to entirely pass-fail, even in the preclinical curriculum. And then they've done away with AOA. So there's a lot less that you can actually filter for in these applications. And it seems that this has made this anxiety just off the charts. And again, like in 1999, 2000, to date myself, this was relatively confined to the highly competitive specialties. In fact, people sort of joked that I was doing basic science research as a intended pediatrician. And the highly competitive specialties are on fire. And now, even in pediatrics, people are wound up about this. So as a group for the Scholarly Concentrations Collaborative, we, really have thought a lot about, like, what do we do? I mean, option one is we can just carry on and do everything we can to support student publication. And to be clear, like, I'm at the University of Chicago, which prides itself on being the teacher of teachers, right? We want our students to go on and have academic careers. And so I want them to publish because I think it's impactful for their career growth, but not because I want them to have 35 publications in order to match into neurosurgery, right? The other option is to really take a step back and think, what do we want our students to be gaining from their research participation? How are we hoping they're going to grow? And are their perceptions of what residency program directors want even correct? So I'm going to say that option one is not the right choice here. So if we take a step back as educators, why do we want our students to participate in research? Well, most importantly, I want them to develop critical thinking skills. This is something they're going to need for their entire career as a physician. I also want them to be able to identify good research that draws rational conclusions from not great research that they might not want to give as much weight to. And obviously, as educators, we need to meet the LCME standards, and one of them talks about availability of research and critical thinking and being a self-directed learner. And research is a great way to check a lot of those boxes. At many schools, yours and mine, right, we really want our students to participate in adding to scientific knowledge. We want them to consider at least a career that includes research. All of these, I think, are very clear goals. And yes, would I like them to be able to match into the specialty they want? Of course. But the University of Chicago is pouring a lot of resources into their scholarly concentrations program, and I'm sure that you are as well. And it's not because your goal is to match X number of people into orthopedic surgery, right? So this is a very primary, this is right at the front of our students' minds, and they're worried about it the first day of medical school. Right? We ask our students, we do an intake assessment in August, and we ask them to give us a little narrative about what they hope that they will do for their research during medical school. And there are excessive details and angst in this writing. Well, I'm thinking about derm, or I might be thinking about this, and I might be thinking about that. And I'm already worried about who I'm going to work with and how many publications I'm going to get. So we have to acknowledge that, but also be true to the goals that we think are important for our students. So at the very beginning of my tenure at leading the Scholarly Concentrations Collaborative, I sent out a very unscientific Google survey asking people to rank the relative importance of all of these things from 1 to 9 in terms of what their goals were for their scholarly concentration programs. And like, low response rate, not scientific, right? But even from the very get-go, this appreciate the importance of scholarship and encourage critical thinking are very important, and make my students more competitive for the match was not a front runner here. And, again, at both of our schools, we really are thinking about what our students are going to do in their careers and recognize that we need physician scientists, right, in order to drive medicine forward. We need people who see patients, who understand the clinical questions that are, real sticking points in taking care of the patients in front of us. And we're thoughtful about this, right? And so one of the things that we stepped back and looked at the University of Chicago using local research or local data was just whether what sort of impact our scholarly concentration program was having on intention to participate in research. So like, if that's one of our most important goals, all of this matching into competitive specialties aside, is the program doing that? We were able to publish this. This is the reference in academic medicine. We used all of the 2014 and 2015 MD-only graduates from our school. We had a 100% response rate because we required these surveys to be completed. And we used the AAMC research career intention question that historically was on the graduation questionnaire. And that is this: how extensively do you expect to be involved in research during your medical career? And there were 5 choices from exclusively involved to not involved. And we defined this as your career intention. And we calculated a change score just by subtracting what you were at graduation from where you were at matriculation. And we used ordinal logistic regressions that we separated out by baseline intent. And the students who had high baseline intent were the ones who, at matriculation, the first week of medical school, said they expected to be exclusively or significantly involved in research during their career. I hate this is a lot of information, but it is. So I have used some boxes to make this more straightforward. So it turns out that in our sample at the University of Chicago, publication during medical school was associated with increased intention for career-long research from matriculation to graduation. And this is, we found it for all students when we controlled for baseline intent, but it's really driven by these high interest matriculants. But this is really interesting, right? These are students who show up the first day of medical school and say, I really want to be involved in research in my career. And if they publish, their odds of that going up over the course of the 4 years increases, an odds ratio of over five, which was really terrific and shows us that you get one publication, you sort of see that you can do it, and maybe it increases your confidence and you sort of get hungry to go to the next meeting and present the next work. This was also really interesting to us, that our female students who came in highly interested were additionally much more likely to have that interest go up. And we hypothesized that this is because of strong mentorship, and we'll dig into that in a minute. But that was a great place to start. And then we wanted to turn around and see, what do our students want to get out of this? And so if you've been at Mount Sinai for a while, you might recognize Karen Zier's name. So she was somebody who I met very early in my work with the Scholarly Concentrations Collaborative and joined us with this work. And the first author on this is actually my summer research student, who's now in anesthesia attending at the University of Chicago. And what we did here, we sent a survey out to all first-year students at Pritzker and at ICANN. It was 2 years of Pritzker students and 1 year of ICANN students. We got 186 responses with a pretty good response rate. We again asked them this research career interest GQ question, and we asked them to free response in their top 3 specialty interests, which we then categorized by what you would have to match into to get to that. So if you said cardiology, we said that was internal medicine, right? And if any one of those 3 was a highly competitive specialty, we said that they were interested in a highly competitive specialty, right? And then we asked them about 13 goals that we, worked out together that are related to scholarly concentration programs. 8 of them were skill related, 4 of them were accomplishment related, and then mentorship was sort of out on its own. So again, this is the how extensively do you expect to be involved in research with those same standard answers from the AAMC GQ. And then we identified a specialty as highly competitive if greater than 80% of its PGY1 spots were filled by US seniors using data from the 2015 NRMP charting outcomes in the match. This measure, this greater than 80% of the PGY1 spots filled by US grads, was used in 2 separate papers that had been published before this. One of them is Green from 2009 in Academic Medicine that I'll highlight in a few minutes. But in 2015, these were the specialties. And I think if you take a step back and look at those seem rational, right? The O's, ortho, ophtho, otolaryngology, derm, neurosurgery, right? Those seem rational as highly competitive specialties. The responses that we got were relatively gender balanced, a little bit more women, because we surveyed 2 classes at Pritzker and only 1 at ICANN. I mean, that balance makes sense. We had about 46% where one of their 3 was a highly competitive specialty, and 40% who said they were interested in career-long research, using that exclusively or significantly as defining interest in career-long research. So these goals were rated from 1, not important at all, to 5, very important. And we show the means and then the standard deviations. And we grouped these as skills goals. So these are gain proficiency, learn to, right? Do your own statistics, develop a career-long scholarly interest, right? Things that you're really trying to build skill at. And the accomplishments make sense now. I want to publish, be first author, give a poster or a talk, and enhance my competitiveness in the match. These are things I am hoping to accomplish as a result of my participation. and then mentorship. And again, the things I'll highlight here is that the highest mean of any of these goals was to develop a strong mentoring relationship with a faculty member. And I think we all know that this is a key feature of scholarly concentration programs. But our students see that as something that's really important too. They're looking for a role model who they can work with. And then runner up, enhance competitiveness in the match, right? So interesting to start with. We then created a skill composite and an accomplishment composite for each by adding the Likert for all of the, so all of the goal Likerts we added and all of the accomplishment Likerts we added. And we used these to do some interesting regressions. So what we found here, to walk you through this, is that if the students had an interest in a research career, they had a significantly higher skill composite. If you had an interest in a competitive residency and an interest in a research career, so I'll give you that, you had a significantly higher accomplishment composite. And interesting again, and this goes back to what I talked about with our Pritzker-only data, female medical students significantly higher odds of rating mentorship very highly as one of their goals coming out of this. And so I think we're really seeing programs that give individual attention to female students and show them that they can do this and give them positive role models as being really important to, again, like those students' success in their medical school scholarly activity, but also their interest in participating in scholarship going forward. So what we're seeing here is really interesting, right? Already 10 years ago, before these publication numbers went, through the roof, our students who have interest in competitive residencies know that they need to get these accomplishments in order to move forward. And I really see this as a fundamental mismatch between our learning goals, and it's easy to get swept up in this, right? Like, oh, this is amazing. Our student published in Nature. Like, yes, that is amazing, right? And hopefully that student is publishing in Nature because they want to go on and have a research career. But it doesn't like grab me as much to be like, this is amazing. Our student had 35 abstracts. Like, really? How did they do that in 4 years? That sounds like a lot. And are those real? Are they all the same abstract recycled over and over again? What's going on here? And so I feel like there's overlap, particularly at medical schools that aim to graduate future physician scientists. But the amount of pressure that our students are feeling has taken off. And I feel like it sort of blinds them to the whole point of them doing research, right? When their goal is to have these numbers. So what's actually happening? This is a really neat paper that was published by Brian Elliott and Brian Carmody in the Journal of Graduate Medical Education about a year and a half ago now. I mean, and the title just gets you, right? Publish or Perish, the Research Arms Race and Residency Selection. So they went to PubMed and looked for author affiliation that included medical student. And look at this, right? I mean, this is like crazy. And they're absolutely right. This probably underestimates it because a lot of medical student work is probably published after they finish. So it's actually attributed to someone who's a resident, not a medical student. But it absolutely grabs your attention. And then what they did is they went to the NRMP charting outcomes in the match and grabbed these numbers and made a little chart, and I added the color overlay to it, right? So average numbers of research presentations, abstracts, and publications of matched applicants by specialty over 13 years. And so I made it green if it was between 5 and 10, yellow if it was between 10 and 15, orange between 15 and 20, and red if it was north of 20. And if you take a step back and just look at that as a heat map, it's really impressive. And in 2022, the only specialty where where the matched applicants had fewer than 5 publications is family medicine. Now, this doesn't tell, it also, excludes urology and ophtho because were not part of the NRMP match. But this doesn't tell the whole story. So I want to remind you that this is matched applicants. And so what our students are doing is they're also looking at unmatched applicants. So the next several slides are all data that I have gleaned from the NRMP, like publicly available online data. So this is the table from the most recent match last spring. So the matched applicants had an average of 3.7 research experience, but the unmatched were 4.3. And the abstracts, presentations, and publications for matched was 10, but for unmatched, it was 11. So I think our students are focusing on the wrong thing here because there's not necessarily a big gap here, right? But I think the fear is that if I don't have as many as I need, I got to have more than the unmatched, right? And so, this table is like a lot to look at, right? But this is comparing the mean number of research experiences for matched and unmatched, and they're all fairly close in terms of research experiences. You start to see a bit of a gap where the blue column is generally higher than the green column when you look at abstracts, presentations, and publications. I will point out to you that it cuts off at 24 and neurosurgery is at 37, right? And, my eye also as a pediatrician went to this, and I'm going to tell you that this 21.5 is driven. There were only 3 unmatched people in pediatrics last year, or 5. It was like a single digit number. And so clearly one of them had an excessive amount of publications. So I don't think that that's a real number. I mean, it's a real number. I don't think it's a meaningful number. So I am a visual person in terms of graphs, not looking at like rows and rows of numbers. So I spent a minute and I went through all of these charting outcomes in the match from 2007 all the way up to 2024 and sort of made it easier for you to look at this. And so the orange lines are research experiences where the solid is matched and the dashed is unmatched. And the blue is abstracts, presentations, and publications where the solid is matched and the dashed is unmatched. And we'll start with neurosurgery. And I've done you the courtesy of putting a little red box around those highest numbers so you can see we're going to go from high to low, right? But look at this. Like in 2024, the unmatched neurosurge applicant average was 31 publications. And that's not a single digit number of humans. That's like a double digit number of humans, right? And I don't think that if this unmatched student with 30 publications had 40, that they were going to match, right? There's something else about that applicant, either their strategy, maybe they like only ranked 3 programs, maybe there's something catastrophic in one of their letters, maybe they failed a couple step exams, right? Like there's something else that's driving this. But I think our students see this number and they're like, that's not going to be me. I'm going to have 35 publications, right? And so, yes, there is some separation here when you look at these highly competitive surgical specialties, but it's not like the unmatched students have none, right? And so these numbers just fundamentally don't tell the whole story, but it's like our students are trying to read these tea leaves and they're not particularly informative. I pulled otolaryngology over here so you can have some comparison to these slightly more civilized numbers, which are still going up, right? Like to be clear. And I put internal medicine, peds, and neurology because these are the specialties that are have the most NIH awards per person. And so this is where the scholars are coming from, right? And when you look at career-long work, and again, I left off that unmatched in 2024 for peds because I don't know what was going on with that student, but it's not normative. And so there's still some separation, particularly in internal medicine, but a lot more variability, and the numbers are much closer. So there's a lot of limitations, but this is the best data that our students have, right? So to list a few, there's no range or standard deviations reported. They are not separating out the 4-year MDs from those with additional time for research, right? And I think that a lot of our students now feel that if they want to match in some of these competitive specialties, they have to take a research year so they can up their numbers, right? But that I have to just add as an equity issue because not everybody can afford to take a 5th year. Not every school can provide research stipends for people to have living expenses, right? Nobody wants to take an extra year of loans to be able to pay their rent. And, I think, that extra year in order to match in some of these things actually does separate out students who have, who can be backstopped by their families to pay for some of these things. There's no control for program setting in terms of academic centers, community-based hospitals, et cetera, in terms of who's sort of looking at, matched applicants and where they're matching. It's just match or not match. The histograms that the NRMP provides clump greater than 5 publications, presentations, and abstracts into one bucket, which might be useful for peds and internal medicine, but is super unhelpful for neurosurgery because everyone's in that bucket, right? The presentations, when you look at the ARIS application, are actually separate, but abstracts and publications are clumped together. And if you go to Reddit for a minute, which I have to admit I did last night, there's all kinds of advice for applying into neurosurgery, like how you take your one abstract and turn it into 5 entries, right, in the ERIS section that asks for published abstracts and publications. So there's a little bit of gaming this. It doesn't game out, or it doesn't separate out first author, middle author, Nature, the Journal of Toenail Fungus. Like you don't know any of these things, and you can't distinguish original research from case reports or letters to the editor. So our students are putting so much weight into this, and it's just not particularly helpful information for them. But again, our students are extremely focused on these numbers, and I suspect that some of yours are as well. And just one little caveat before we move on, which is I'm puzzled as to why there's this huge emphasis on research and surgical subspecialties. And I wonder if it's real or again, like just squinting at not great data. And so our surgical programs, and again, I'm a pediatrician, using this to identify highly motivated students. Are they using it as a mechanism to identify surgical talent? I mean, maybe if you can do surgery on mice, that I could go with that, right? Are they using it to demonstrate a commitment to the specialty? Are they trying to grow their ranks of clinician scientists? Like that's all of these things are possible, but it's not very, there's not a lot of transparency here. And so I'll just draw your eye to this paper that was published a couple of years ago in BMJ Open that's using data, big data analysis from NIH Reporter. And so what these researchers did was they looked at NIH Reporter, they sorted by the primary appointment, the Department of Primary Appointment of the PI, and looked at the number of people who are actually practicing in this specialty. And they ranked specialties by the NIH dollars of funding per active physician per year, right? So here's no surprise. Internal medicine ranks third, only behind path and neurology, right? With almost 40% of the NIH dollars, right? But like here's peds at 9% of the NIH dollars, and here's neurosurgery at only 1.6% of the NIH dollars, right? And you look at these absolute numbers. Now, neurosurgery ranks fifth, right? And they did see a 34% increase in the number of grants over the course of this 10 years, and ortho saw a 32% increase. But these are not the specialties that are driving NIH dollars. And so, it's a little I'm still confused as to why our students think they have to get, 19 publications to match in plastic surgery. They only had 16 grants. And I bet half of them went to my colleague, Russell Reed at the University of Chicago, because he's got like 5, right? So it's a little confusing why this is happening. And, the authors of this paper, hypothesized some things. They said, first, maybe it's a little bit hard to sort of shoehorn a surgical subspecialty into alignment with the NIH mission or of the specific institute. They posit that there are, objectively fewer training grants assigned to these specialties. And so maybe it's hard to pull people in and get them onto training grants and then support them out into careers. That's possible. They point out that 60% of MSTP graduates match into internal medicine, path, peds, and neurology. And remember, internal medicine, path, and neurology were the top 3. In that chart that I showed you, but the distribution of MSTP graduates is training and it's changing. And we see this at the University of Chicago. I'm not sure if you're seeing it. And they say that this can lead to increased competition for funding. The one thing they don't point out is the discrepancy between the NIH salary cap and the reimbursement of surgeons. And I'm not paid as an orthopedic surgeon, but I suppose that they're probably able to bring more money into the institution per hour in the OR than they are in the lab. So all of these things are, so the institution's mission really has to align with scholarship in order to support that, right? So there's a lot of things here that just don't add up. And so we really need information from program directors. So it really wasn't a lot when we went to look at this about 10 years ago. We found a paper that was published in 2009 that was based on a survey in 2006. And they ranked, surveyed program directors across the country, and everybody, ranked the importance of different things in creating their rank list and deciding who to bring into their program. And published research in medical school and research experience were like dead last, right? And they basically say research isn't that important unless all of the candidates are outstanding. And so then it's used to discriminate between otherwise equivalent students. Okay, I mean, that makes some sense for then. And maybe that's what started this, right? And then, it's just sort of caught on fire. And this paper also, I will just point out, is the one that used defined competitiveness by the percent of positions that were filled by current US seniors. So then we went looking for specialty specific work, and there's a lot. So a lot of people have published over the last 5 years or so, particularly with the transition to step one. But they're not particularly helpful in looking at research. They're more like, did people start to use step two? Or, what are some specific things and are letters of recommendation important? And so there's not a lot of dedicated attention to research. So in the Scholarly Concentrations Collaborative, we sat down on Zoom in 2020 while everybody was trapped at home, and we're like, we cannot advise our students without information. And so this was our COVID project to figure out. So we developed a survey with about 17 of us all together, representing a wide array of institutions, developed a survey through some iterative discussion and then some help with actual question generation from the survey lab at the University of Chicago. And we sent out our survey to program directors at all US programs to which senior students can apply, excluding transitional programs. This was available in the fall of 2021. So we, again, had a lot of time on our hands. And so we went to the ACGME website and found 5,424 unique emails. If the email was like PEDS residency at uchicago.edu, we actually found the name of the program director and went diving for their personal email. And we had a final list of about 5,200 deliverable emails that went to 85% academic medical centers, 13% community-based, and 2% military or federal programs. We did not have an awesome response rate, but I will highlight that this is not that different than the program director response rate to the NRMP survey. So we're sort of in line with that, but 885 responses representing almost 400 institutions. And I will point out that the community-based programs were actually overrepresented based on their share of the group that we sent surveys out to. We had about 20% of our programs who said that research was of high importance in reviewing residency applications. About half said moderate, 30% said low, only 10% said they didn't consider research. And so they were like exited from the survey after they said that. About 63% said that training physician scientists was a goal of their program, and we did control for that in our multivariate analyses when we were going forward with our data. So following that method from the green paper, we ranked programs, or we listed them in descending order by their fill rate based on US MD senior students. So first round through the match at US medical schools, MD only. So we don't have DO students represented in here, but we wanted to use the same methodology that others had used before us. And you can see this starts all the way up with thoracic surgery at 93% fill by US students and ending at pathology with 32% fill. And we divided our responses into thirds. So most competitive, competitive, and least competitive by the number of responses that we had. And again, when we went back to look at this, to see like, does this make sense? Like it did, I guess PEDS was sort of on the cusp there. And again, I say that as a pediatrician. But all of the highly competitive surgical subspecialties ended up here in this most competitive group. A couple that maybe didn't make the most sense to us. Like, I don't know that psych and child psych, like that, this is a combined program, psych, child psych. There's not a lot of spaces, but we stuck to the rank. And this is how we ended up. So first, we wanted to ask what people defined as meaningful participation in research, because then we used that term going forward. And so we asked our program directors to rank all of these on a 4-point scale from high, moderate, low importance, and not considered. And so in all of these going forward, LC is those least competitive specialties, C is competitive, and MC is the most competitive. And so you can see that like most commonly people said, completion of an original research project is important, right? But publication in a high impact journal, less so, right? And so the single asterisk means that it was significantly different. Sorry, the competitive and the most competitive were significantly different than the least competitive in an unadjusted model. The double asterisk means it remains significant after we adjusted for setting, so academic, community, or military federal programs, whether research was important to selecting residents, and whether sending graduates into research careers was a goal of the program. And so for everybody, regardless of what your setting is and what your program goals are, completion of an original research project was important to say you had a meaningful participation in research, and having one publication was as well. And the rest of these single asterisks doesn't mean they're not important. It just means like students need to know their audience, right? So if you're at an academic medical center, right? So once you control for being an academic medical center or wanting to send people into a research career, some of these things wash away, being a first author, having more than one publication, et cetera, right? But if you're in those places, they probably do still matter. So I feel like what this is saying is like, yes, publication is important. No, publication in Nature, less so, right? Then we sort of turned to the crux of what we thought was really driving this race, and that was USMLE converting to pass-fail. And it was nice to actually see the data that we hypothesized would be the case was actually the case. And that's that these most competitive specialties, more than 50% of the time, said that without a USMLE step 1, they were going to be considering research more rigorously in selecting their applicants. We then asked, do you value applicant research of all types equally, or do you value some types more than other? And if you value some types more highly, which ones? Because this is a constant source of stress for our students. Like, what research projects should I pick? Tell me what I should be doing, right? So first, I want to point out that only 251 out of our 875 program directors said they valued some types more highly than others. For the ones that did, in descending order, right, clinical research was the most important, and basic is down here, only a third of them, right? But then we looked to see if this was different for program directors in competitive or most competitive specialties. And there you go, right? Basic science, most competitive specialties, significantly associated even, or significantly more likely to be important or highly valued even after you adjust. Clinical research only in the unadjusted model. So this is a know your audience, right? And translational science, same. There were some that were significantly less important to program directors from these competitive specialties than from the least competitive specialties. But what that's saying is that it's more important to the least competitive specialties, which includes internal medicine by a lot, right? So internal medicine does care about quality improvement, public and community health, global, et cetera. All right, I'm going to zip through these because I realize I have a lot to say. Okay. We then asked if program directors weighed productivity differently depending on what type of research it was and if they expect more, right? And what's important here, again, 309 said they expected higher productivity from certain types of research. And the most important one I will highlight here is clinical research, right? So if you choose to do basic science, people aren't necessarily expecting awesome productivity because they know that's hard. But if you're choosing clinical research, they want to see that you did something with it. And I think that's actually something concrete that we can tell our students. We also asked if program directors saw participation in research as a proxy for other desirable traits in their applicants. And these are, again, ranked from most important or most commonly stated to least commonly stated. And this is like reassuring, right? Intellectual curiosity, critical and analytical thinking skills, self-directed learning, etc. Commitment to residency specialty, which is if I want to match an ortho, I better do ortho work, is not at the top. It's at the bottom. And true, it is statistically more commonly identified from program directors for these most competitive fields, but it's still only 35%. I did think what was interesting was that the most competitive program directors were less likely to say that research indicated an interest in an academic career, which is sort of a head scratcher again, in terms of why are we looking at it so much then? All right. We asked our program directors to do a head-to-head comparison. There's a lot that you could try to read into these tea leaves too, but these dark bars were research is more important than AOA, service work leadership, et cetera. The middle light grays that they're of equal importance, and then this medium was that this other characteristic was more important. I only included the most competitive and competitive specialties here because the least competitive and the competitive were pretty close. But I will highlight here that research is equally or more important, greater than like 2/3 of the time compared to the USMLE Step 2 score, which is kind of nice, I guess. Like we're not filtering by Step 2 score now. But again, like letters of recommendation, specialty performance, and clerkship grades are still more important than research. And I think that we need to be highlighting to our students that they cannot be sacrificing these things by trying to be like, 35 publications in 4 years. So there's clearly some limitations here, right? So our response rate was not fantastic, but was well distributed across programs and across settings in terms of academic community, et cetera. We did use that definition of competitiveness based on fill rates by US seniors. So there is not weight here on what's happening with DO students, et cetera. There is definitely an insufficient N to analyze by specialty, and I think there's some that our students would love more granular data on. There's a social desirability bias, right? Like who wants to be the one who answers and says, no, no one cares about that, right? And the research, these results represent intentions. This was all before people had encountered their first group of students with just a pass in step 1. So it'll be interesting to go back and see what happens. But it's important takeaways and then caveats to everything, right? More competitive specialties definitely expect more productivity as evidence of meaningful participation in research. But in adjusted models, only completion of an original research project and having one publication were significant. So this is really know your audience. Like, what did we adjust for, right? In the absence of a numeric step 1 score, program directors from these highly competitive specialties anticipated that research would be more important than previous. But this is anticipated, not actual. And we just said more, but like how much more, right? Program directors from the most competitive specialties who value some types of research more than others, which was a minority, valued basic translational research and clinical research more than other types, in comparison to the program directors from lower competitive specialties. But in adjusted models, only basic science persists in that, and they do expect more productivity from students doing clinical research. Research serves as a proxy for many important traits, but even among the most competitive specialties, it's only an indicator of commitment to the specialty for 35%. But like, here's what the students come back with. And it's true, right? If the program director of your dream program is in that 35%, it's 100% for you. And also that odd, like head scratcher, less likely to see research as an indicator of interest in an academic career. And then in head-to-head comparisons with other application components, it seems that program directors are engaging in holistic review, but research is often equally important or more important than many application components for these highly competitive specialties. So what on earth do we tell our students? So here's what I have landed on. You need to choose a project that's meaningful to you by topic and type because you are most likely to be invested and successful in getting it out the door, and you're going to seem passionate when you talk about it in your interviews. I think it's advantageous to choose a project that can be completed and presented, right? Like, don't choose to do a 10-year project. Choose something that has a bite that you can actually have as your own. And know the programs that you're considering. Do they value research? Do they aim to send graduates into research careers, et cetera? I really think there are some things that could be changed about the application process that would mitigate some of this pressure. First, I really think we need better data from the NRMP. Like, this is like literally trying to read tea leaves, right? It would really be helpful to separate some of these things out in the data that's being presented so our students know what they're looking at. I think that the ARIS application could change to continue to allow students to showcase their accomplishments. So Brian Elliott and Brian Carmody suggested limiting research output to like 4, and like the editorials on that were like, do not recommend, right? So I want students to be able to showcase their accomplishments, but not allow repeat listing of the same work to drive up numbers, maybe a way to separate out original research from case reports and commentaries, which right now all count as publications. Like, there has to be a way to make this seem more authentic to what the students actually done during medical school. And we really need to work on alignment between UME research leadership and residency program directors. Like, we are missing the mark by allowing students to think that publication numbers are a gatekeeper to residency training. As I said before, the student with 25 pubs who didn't match into neurosurgery probably wouldn't have matched with 35. And the point of research in medical school is not to support the match, but it's hard to promise our students that that isn't what's happening. And then like, we all have to decide together that we're going to fix this, or it's going to be hard to rein it back in. So I think this is going to take a real commitment from program directors to transparency. I'm not sure how many of you have experienced the common data set as your children are approaching college, but I have had a lot of time churning over that. And the common data set for undergraduate admissions is very transparent about what's going on. And we need to be showing that data. We're going to need some investment from Eris and the AAMC to sort of right the ship on what the application looks like. And I think we need vocal support from the UME research program leadership regarding what we're actually hoping students will get from our program, because what we're really trying to do is support critical thinking and support the workforce of physician scientists going forward, and really spark that interest and show students that they have the capacity to do this and want to include it in their career. And I will end and leave my email up there, because I'd love to hear from anybody who wants to join us in this conversation. And I'm sure we'll be talking about it next year at the AAMC.